Good morning, Team Papperstein. I hope this video finds you all well. I'm going to finish up chapter 14. I'm going to complete chapter 15 because it's actually a really quick chapter, and then I'll do another video for 16. We left off on page 146 after the 3 stars. Gabriel slept soundly for the earliest part of the night. If you remember, Jonas offered to take Gabriel into his sleeping room in the dwelling to help his whole family because Gabriel's not sleeping through the night. Jonas in his bed lay awake for a while. From time to time, he raised himself on one elbow, looking over at the crib. The new child was on his stomach, his arms relaxed beside his head, his eyes closed, and his breathing regular and undisturbed. Finally, Jonas slept too. Then, as the middle hours of the night approached, the noise of Gabe's restlessness woke Jonas. The new child was turning under his cover, flailing his arms and beginning to whimper. Jonas rose and went to him. Gently, he patted Gabriel's back. Sometimes that was all it took to lull him back to sleep, but the new child still squirmed fretfully under his hand. Still patting rhythmically, Jonas began to remember the wonderful sail that the giver had given him not too long before. A bright, breezy day on a clear turquoise lake, and above him the white sail of the boat billowing as he moved along in the brisk wind. I don't know how many of you have ever been sailing before, but if you could picture yourself sailing, that's what it would be like. He was not aware of giving the memory. So if you think about how Jonas gets his memories from the giver puts his hand on Jonas's back and relays the memory to him almost like in a hypnosis type thing or in a dream. Well, Jonas is patting Gabriel's back, the baby in the crib, and he's not really aware of the fact that he's giving this memory of the sail to Gabriel. He was not aware of giving the memory, but suddenly he realized that it was becoming dimmer, that it was sliding through his hand into the being of the new child. Gabriel became quiet. Startled, Jonas pulled back what was left of the memory. With a burst of will, he removed his hand from the little back and stood quietly beside the crib. To himself, he called the memory of the sail forward again. It was still there, but the sky was less blue, the gentle motion of the boat slower, the water of the lake more murky and clouded. He kept it for a while, soothing his own nervousness at what had occurred, and then let it go and returned to his bed. Once more, toward dawn, the new child woke and cried out, and again Jonas went to him. This time, he quite deliberately placed his hand firmly on Gabriel's back and released the rest of the calming day on the lake. And again, Gabriel slept. But now Jonas lay awake thinking. He no longer had any more than a wisp of the memory, and he felt a small lack where it had been. He could ask the giver for another sail, he knew, a sail perhaps on the ocean next time, for Jonas had a memory of ocean now and knew what it was. He knew that there were sailboats there too, and memories yet to be acquired. He wondered, though, if he should confess to the giver that he had given a memory away. He had not yet qualified to be a giver himself, nor had Gabriel been selected to be a receiver. That he had this power frightened him. He decided not to tell. That's actually the end of chapter 14. There wasn't much left. So I'm going to start chapter 15, which is pretty quick, and then I'll stop there. Jonas entered the annex room and realized immediately that it was a day when he would be sent away. The giver was rigid in his chair, his face in his hands. "I'll come back tomorrow, sir," he said quickly, and then he hesitated, "unless maybe there's something I can do to help." The giver looked up at him. His face contorted with suffering. "Please," he gasped, "take some of the pain." Jonas helped him to his chair at the side of the bed. Then he quickly removed his tunic and lay face down. "Put your hands on me," he directed, aware that in such anguish the giver might need reminding. The hands came, and the pain came with them. and through them. Jonas braced himself and entered the memory which was torturing the giver. Okay, oh boy. Boys and girls, buckle your seatbelts. He was in a confused, noisy, foul-smelling place. It was daylight, early morning, and the air was thick with smoke that hung, yellow and brown, above the ground. Around him, everywhere, far across the expanse of what seemed to be a field, lay groaning men. Wild-eyed horse, its bridle torn and dangling, trotted frantically through the mounds of men, tossing its head, whining in panic. It stumbled finally, then fell and did not rise. Jonas heard a voice next to him. "Water," the voice said, in a parched, croaking whisper. He turned his head toward the voice and looked into a half-closed eyes of a boy who seemed not much older than himself. Dirt streaked the boy's face and his matted blonde hair. He lay sprawled, his gray uniform glistening with wet, fresh blood. The colors of the carnage were grotesquely bright, the crimson wetness on the rough and dusty fabric, the ripped shreds of grass, startling green in the boy's yellow hair. The boy stared at him. "Water," he begged again, and when he spoke, a new spurt of blood drenched the coarse cloth across his chest and sleeve. One of Jonas's arms was immobilized with pain, and he could see through his own torn sleeve something that looked like ragged flesh and splintery bone. He tried his remaining arm and felt it move. Slowly he reached to his side, felt the metal container there, and removed its cap, stopping the small motion of his hand now and then to wait for the surging pain to ease. Finally, when the container was open, he extended his arm slowly across the blood-soaked earth, inch by inch, and held it to the lips of the boy. Water trickled into the imploring mouth and down the grimy chin. The boy sighed. His head fell back, his lower jaw dropping as if he had been surprised by something. A dull blankness slid slowly across his eyes. He was silent. But the noise continued all around, the cries of wounded men, the cries begging for water and for mother and for death. Horses lying on the ground shrieked, raised their heads and stabbed randomly toward the sky with their hooves. From the distance, Jonas could hear the thud of cannons. Overwhelmed by pain, he lay there in the fearsome stench for hours, listened to the men and animals die, and learned what warfare meant. Finally, when he knew that he could bear it no longer and would welcome death himself, he opened his eyes and was once again on the bed. The giver looked away as if he could not bear to see what he had done to Jonas. "Forgive me," he said. And that's the end of chapter 15. It kind of reminds me a lot, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, that's so terrible that he would have to give Jonas that memory. We learn about those memories when we study history. We learn about previous wars and battles. But there's a reason why we learn about those things in history. We learn about them because we want to prevent things like that from happening in the future. So it is important to have them, to have the wisdom from them, even if you don't live through them yourself. So Jonas, because he has to have all the wisdom of the world, he has to gain these memories of war and of pain. And no one else in his community will understand that. So I want you to start thinking about whether you think it would be better for one person to hold all this memory and all this wisdom, or if it is better to share it. And we'll continue on with chapter 16 in my next read aloud.